Let's give a warm JSerra and Southern California welcome to Dr. Evelyn Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Reedy. Can you show me what to do with the program here? Thank you. That was a very warm welcome, Mr. Reedy. I appreciate it very much. So my program tonight is about healthy body, healthy soul, that we are all of that encompassing together. When I say to people health is more than simply the absence of disease, I get this deer in the headlights look, kind of like, what is this woman talking about? Health is more than the absence of disease. But it's all the living that we do each and every day that brings us to either end of that spectrum, to healthy or to sick. And this is a very new way for a lot of people of looking, because what we've been taught is that you're either sick or you're diseased state, and we need to move forward from that. So I'm going to start with talking some numbers, so you just get an idea of how I arrived at thinking about this whole person. Half of the world's pharmaceuticals are consumed by us here in the United States. Half of the entire world's pharmaceuticals. Yet we only make up 5 to 6% of the planet. That's unbelievable. That should make you shake your head when I say that. That's unreal. According to the CIA fact book, we are 47th in longevity. That's a third world country. 47th in longevity in the United States of America. And we're consuming half the world's pharmaceuticals. According to Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, in 2010, we spent $27.7 billion marketing prescription medications to physicians. That would give you an idea of what we think the answer to everything is. And I want to give my disclaimer here early. You'll never hear me say, don't ever take a pharmaceutical prescription. Never. You'll never hear me say, don't ever have surgery. Because the fact of the matter is that both of those things save lives. The problem is that we abuse them rather than use them. We use that as our first launch to get better. According to the CDC, 48.7% of people take at least one prescription drug a month. 21.7% uses 3 or more. Total office visits of 75% of the people leave with a prescription medication. So why would you go to a doctor? To leave with a prescription. Why do we use so many prescriptions? Because that's why you go to the doctor, and the cycle just goes around and around. According to the CDC, most frequently prescribed are 1, analgesics, pain relievers, 2nd, anti-hyperlipidemic agents, high cholesterol medications, and 3rd, antidepressants. So my question, well, first, the American Association of Pain Physicians. Americans consume 80% of the world's pain medications. 80%. So what I have to ask you, is our pain physical? Is it emotional? Is it intellectual? Or is it spiritual? That's the question. Is it our lifestyle? Our answer is that one size fits all. We have 7 billion people in the world with 7 billion different DNAs, yet everyone gets treated the same way. It's a question of balance. We need more than physical health. We have to look at, as I said, the physical, the emotional, the intellectual, and the spiritual. I want to tell you a little bit about my story when I became a patient. I'm 55 years old now. At 46, I had what's called a TIA, a transient ischemic attack, a mini stroke. And people are like, you got to be kidding me. You're healthy, you look great, how can that be? I worked myself to ridiculous, unattainable days. Single parent, drove 4 hours a day to take my child to a private school, just like everybody here, you want the best for your kids, doing impossible things, started patients every day late, knowing I was going to be late when I got up out of bed in the morning. Did the same thing in the afternoon for pickup, had somebody come, my daughter came to the office with me, then somebody came and took her to swimming after that in the evening, and this is how the day went. Have dinner at 8, 9 o'clock at night. That's probably not that foreign to a lot of people sitting here. It's how we live today, right? Maybe got to bed at 2 or 3 after I did paperwork. Maybe had 2 or 3 hours of sleep. Until one day in my office, I wasn't functioning anymore. My office manager said to me, "Doc, you're having a stroke." And I said, "I know." And she said, "I'm going to call the ambulance." I said, "No, that's that's not good. That's way too, dramatic. Just drive me to the hospital. By the time we got there, 20 minutes later, I couldn't walk, I couldn't speak. Had all the tests done in the hospital, and the answer was you had a TIA, and the truth is you're probably going to have another one within the next 3 months. And that was it. So what do? You look at, is it time to change my life? So I began to look at our system and said, what we're really good at is emergency care. If I had an emergency, this is the place I'd want to be, right? What did I do? I went to the emergency room. Diagnostics we are great at. We can diagnose, we can do all the tests, we can tell you, here you go, pinpointed. But are we good at prevention? Are we good at teaching people about lifestyle? Are we good at the big global picture of what a human being is? I'd say no. And I was my own patient. So it got down to where I say here, doctor, heal thyself. I started to do a lot of research on what happened to me, how I got there, and how I was going to get better. Because when I left, they said, this is going to happen again. And to add insult to injury, I'm 46 years old. My daughter's father had already passed away, which was more of, okay, you're trying to do all these things as one person, but I'm going to leave the most precious person in my life without anybody doesn't make sense. I took the next 3.5 weeks off of work and rested and started doing research. Went to every medical convention I could, trying to find out, learn what could be done. I went to a conference talking about neurotransmitters, which are brain chemicals, and used my example, my lab work, to the scientists there, and the scientist said, wow, these person's numbers are extreme. Are they on any medications? And I said, no, and it's me. And the guy looked at me like, you've got to be kidding. And as I began to study, I said, yeah, you could see that this is where I was going to end up when you do this objective type of work. So the first of the pillars is physical health. It takes work, but actually it's the easiest to change because there are steps of what you can do and how you can change. We have all the data. With the numbers that I just shared with you should make you just shake your head at how we're conducting health here. I mean, I would go on to say that the debate that we spent about healthcare crisis and having to change our system, that we don't have a healthcare crisis, we have a crisis in how we think about health. And we can throw trillions of dollars on a situation that's never going to get better unless we change how we think about it. So I ask you, do we consume the pill or does the pill consume us as a nation? Should the fourth leading cause of death be fatal drug reactions in what we call an evolved society? The number one cause of death is both chronic and preventable. That should make you shake your head and say, she must be making a mistake, that the number one killer, heart disease, is a preventable disease. What are we doing to change that? Nothing. The second pill that we give out more than anything else is a high cholesterol med. Does that change the fact that the number one killer in the United States is heart disease? So we're going to be looking at an all-encompassing entire arsenal of ways to change it. And I always say that the first route is conservative, functional, then we move on to Western medicine. We have to look at grassroots and start at the beginning. So to get the full picture, research offered by the Complementary Alternative Medicine Group, which is California-based research institute, tells us that the drug companies, this was the latest statistic, spend $57.7 billion on marketing pharmaceuticals to the public. So what's the answer going to be when you go to the doctor? Is it going to be sit there and take the time and say, we've got to look at changing your lifestyle? Or are we going to say, here you go? Because that's a system. Couple minutes, no fault of the doctors, but you literally have 3 or 4 minutes with the patient, and then you have to move on. And that's double when pharmaceutical companies, and this is not picking on pharmaceutical companies, it's just to get you to see the big picture. When they said drugs cost so much money because of the research and development, that's not true. The number spent there, $57.7 billion, is actually double what's spent on research and development. $61,000 is targeted at individual physicians. That's a pretty nice date. $61,000, right? That's a lot of nice times. No two people have the same DNA, so no two people in theory, should have the exact same test results and treatment protocol. Everything should be tailored. Sounds idealistic? Not really, because that's how I treat my patients. And when I talk about health, I can get on a soapbox, so watch out, that could still happen tonight. But I am very passionate about it because it is your greatest asset. And you should not settle when it comes to your health. There's so many things that money can buy, and if you know somebody who's sick, very sick, terminal, there's no money in the world that's going to change that situation for them. So to know that there's information that is not going out to the public, to me, gets me very worked up. And I had to have a situation myself to find out what can be changed. So when we talk about lifestyle diseases, including obesity, we are now looking at the first generation of kids that will not outlive their parents because of the obesity epidemic. That again should make you shake your head. So we have to start with the paradigm shift. Open up your minds a little bit and share with me here. We don't have a headache because we have a lack of Tylenol. We don't have depression because we have a lack of Elavil. We don't have osteoarthrosis because we have a lack of Celebrex. We don't have ADD or ADHD because we have a lack of Ritalin. See the mentality here? We have deficiencies or imbalances within our body, and that's what we have to look at. And there are ways to do that, which I'll get to. Next, we look at emotional health. Taking care of your physical body is the first step to everything. You have to have your physiology in place to move on to the others, but it's the first step towards emotional health. The more we learn, we realize that there's a connection between the body, the mind, and the spirit. The stronger the body, the healthier the mind. And it's also the opposite of that also. The weaker the body, the spirit withers. And you see that when you see people that are sick. The gold standard at Harvard, when Mr. Reedy, Pat, said that I attended Harvard postgraduate medical school, I did a program in body, mind, spirit resiliency. And they're studying this body, mind, spirit, and it's really being documented with the research of this is the way it works, and yet there's so many people that are still afraid to connect all these dots together, that we are more than just our physical health. Just as exercise improves your hearts and your lungs, it also improves your emotional health. Just think about when your brain is oxygenated, you think clearer. What do you do when you work out? After you work out, you say, I feel great. Now you're ready to sit down and take on all your tasks of the day because you're actually moving. The blood is circulating, the oxygen is moving through your body. It lifts your moods, endorphins. Think of why people run, the runner's high. You feel good. So that kind of tells us that the greatest drugstore we have lies right within our body. There's ways to tap in to these hormones, to these chemicals that make your body work. And if you look from an economic standpoint, there's no copay, there's no deductible. You know, you own these things. That's the miracle of the body. The greatest machine known to man is our body. You know, we get excited when Apple comes out with a new product. That is not even close to the wonder of what everyone owns. It's incredible. So my job became, after my situation, to disseminate this information to everybody that I met. I'm like, you know what, this has already been done. I'm not the scientist who did the research. I'm not the brilliant person that came up with how to do the lab work. I'm the person that experienced it and said, other people need to know that this exists. This is another scary number. According to the CDC, by 2020, the second leading cause of medical disability in the United States will be depression. That's only 5 years away. We're not doing anything different. According to Albert Einstein, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. That's exactly what we are doing. Do we want to say in 5 years from now, well, guys, we were right. Exactly what we said was going to happen. Good job. That's insane. That's crazy. Depression is now considered the common cold of psychopathology. 7 out of 10 people report stress and anxiety. 85 to 90% of office visits begin with stress. 68% of people describe problems of insomnia. or problems sleeping. And our culture has gotten so frenetic, and we expect so much out of ourselves each and every day, that there's a lot of people that actually think sleeping is something that's extra. It's not a necessity to your body. Think about warfare. Sleep deprivation is one of the tools used in warfare. There's a reason for that, because it destroys your body, it destroys your mind. And yet this is how we're living day to day, somehow kind of feeling like it's normal. In fact, I saw, somewhat funny, sarcastic commercial today of a comedian talking about her Ambien, saying, "That's how I tuck myself in." Because it's such a norm in our culture. We prescribe 254 million prescriptions for depression at a cost of $10 billion a year. Unreal. Current conventional psychiatry diagnoses based on what the patient or the family reports. So let's say your vocabulary is different than someone else's, and everything is based on symptoms through vocabulary. How do you really know what you're doing? How do you know what the target is if you don't know where the target is? How do you go to war if you don't know where the war is? It doesn't make sense the way we're doing these things. And we actually have objective testing, but it's not used. And I would need another whole hour to go on with why that is, but it's the truth of what's going on. So someone goes in, and let's say you go to the doctor, and you're 3 or 4 minutes, you say, doc, I don't feel like getting out of bed anymore. I'm not sure what's going on. But okay, here you go, and it's going to be some type of antidepressant. Next person goes in and says, don't feel like going to the kids' ball game. Just don't have it in me. Okay, antidepressant. Well, what neurotransmitter, what brain chemical are we trying to affect? Is it dopamine? Is it serotonin? Is it gamma-aminobutyric acid? Is it phenylethylalanine? We don't know. And we gave both of those people the same prescription. It doesn't make sense. Saying we'll try is not good enough when we have these things available. We have the objective testing at our disposal. When I have patients come in, pretty much the basic workup is adrenals, hormones, and neurotransmitters. Adrenal glands are that which give you energy. And mark my words, because there is no prescription drug to take care of adrenal insufficiency yet, no one has adrenal insufficiency. Guaranteed, in the labs, every day and every night across America, pharmaceutical companies are working on a drug for adrenal insufficiency. As soon as that's available, 85% of the people will be diagnosed with insufficiency, because that's how we're running around as a nation. That's where I started. So all of your neurotransmitters, the ones that I just rattled off, because those are usually ones that people have heard of, have a specific function. So if they're not working properly, they're a prerequisite for the rest of your body to work properly. Think about the rise of ADD and ADHD, as well as the other brain imbalances, which is expected to multiply. Again, we're sitting back like, got some numbers for you, and they're not good. Well, I can't wait to be right. Currently, our psychotropic drugs are our current treatment choice. But if these numbers are rising, is it an effective way to treat the problem? Again, is it the description of the symptoms, someone's vocabulary? What if it's more than one imbalance? What if the side effect of some of these pharmaceuticals is suicide? And they are, if you read the packaging. So we move from physical health to emotional health to intellectual health. Typically, we think of intellectual health as academic knowledge. That's how most people think, are you smart? Did you get a good score in the SATs? You good at trivia contests? You think in history about people like Albert Einstein, Abraham Lincoln, Richard Branson. They would all have flunked out of school. So there are different types of intellect. And that's another part where we're missing in society, where we put so much stress into things that really don't complete the whole human person. We think more of intellectual health as things like creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, general knowledge, of course, in education, and the not so common sense. That also is part of intellectual health. And the biggest is adapting to change. People who do well in life are very adaptable. There's something called the blue zones. Has anyone heard of that? Blue zones? It's 5 areas in the world where there's more centenarians than any other place, meaning people that live to be 100 or more. The one thing that they share, each culture has different reasons that we can pinpoint as to why they've lived longer, but the one thing they all have in common is adaptability. Life experience can enhance intelligence. I've been really blessed to have a lot of traveling under my belt. One of my trips was to India. I went to set up an NGO where my job was to ascertain the needs of women and children for education and health. And culturally, the smartest people that I have ever come across were Indians because of, I believe, they are so poor, they have no resources, and they are forced to think outside of the box. I mean, you can go to a taxi driver in Mumbai and they'll tell you 20 different ways to get to the same place. I mean, without GPS, I don't know if any of us could get anywhere anymore. Also, another example, Honduras, a couple months ago, midwinter I went to Honduras and I visited an orphanage, and I did it unannounced because that's really the best way to do those things. Nobody has time to say, you know, let's change what we're doing here. Went around the whole orphanage and they had from newborns to teenagers. There were a group of teenagers around a laptop, really having a good time, and I thought, I gotta go see what's on this laptop. So I walk over, they were watching a TEDx program. I was shocked. One laptop for all these kids and having a ball. That was their only resource. But you think about people like that and how they have been groomed into thinking outside of the box, how to get it done, and they do very well in life. We have to start respecting these other forms of intelligence. Research now tells us that just as a lot of our IQ is wired into our DNA, so is instinct. When you think gut instinct, actually your gut is your second brain. It's our primitive brain. So when you say, I don't know, I just have this gut feeling, or I just have butterflies in my stomach, that's really a signal to your brain of there's something happening here. A subset of intellectual health, then I would definitely say is instinct. You think Babe Ruth, you think Derek Jeter in baseball, these guys just had it. You know, raw talent. You think of the movie The Natural with Robert Redford, baseball movie, just they had it. It was wired inside of them. Instinct. I live in Jupiter, Florida, southern Florida, Palm Beach County. This is an area of where turtles nest. Two of the most beautiful nights I ever had in my life was seeing these huge, majestic turtles come out of the ocean instinctually to lay their eggs. Watching them do that is an incredible experience. The other side of that is months later when you see these little turtles this big making their way down to the ocean. How do they know how to do this? It's wired. It's wired in their DNA, that which makes them up, of instinct. And then the most powerful, the greatest of all the intellects is wisdom. And I believe that wisdom is when we have intellectual health combined with instinct, that it makes people with wisdom so powerful because it's just this combination of everything. And there are ways that we can enhance and kind of bring this out in people. You know, so this is what we really have to look at for the complete human being. Bishop T.D. Jakes, has anybody ever heard of him? Kind of a TV guy? Okay, his quote is, "Instinct is a treasure map of the soul," which I absolutely love. It's that telling you what to do, where to go. And that was a perfect visual for me. It's that instinct leads us to opportunity, and it's wisdom that allows us to know what to do with that opportunity. And then of the 4 pillars, the spiritual pillar is last because it's the softest of all the pillars of health, but it's also the most powerful. As the physical blends into the emotional blends into the intellectual, and the intellectual blends into the spiritual. Your soul is at the heart of what drives each and every one of us, right? Inside of us, who we are. I believe as a society, Mr. Reedy and I were having this conversation at dinner before, that we're lost. But I think if we are given direction, we can bring that back. Our cultural norms are so out of whack that it's unbelievable. It really is. Our priorities. You know, you think about historically seniors, and I don't mean seniors in high school, older folks were the people who were the most disgruntled and would say, you know what, the golden years, anything but golden. But now the baby boomers are the people saying, isn't there anything more than this? I just feel paralyzed. There's nothing happening in my life. Look at the amount of antidepressants. The stats don't lie. Now we have teenagers and kids saying, is this all there is? I mean, you should be at that point in your life where there's nothing better. And it's because culturally we've put in all our time into our possessions. It's all about what we can gather. And when you think about at the end of our lives, we spent our entire life gathering possessions, and there's only one thing that we take with us, and that's our soul. And that's the least thing that we spend the amount of time on. It's everything else. So then we have to look at teaching children to deal with life. And as a parent myself, I say don't be as worried about the end goal for your child, but be concerned with the steps along the way. Just like the 4 pillars, it's the building blocks that you give them, and everybody's going to reach those rough roadblocks and the hard times. But when the building blocks are there, they will get to the other side. You get the physiology right, what we talked about in the physical health, the neurotransmitters, the hormones, the adrenal glands. That leads to optimized emotional health. Allow for new thoughts that we talked about here tonight on intellectual health to create a well-rounded human being. And that is when the door to your soul opens wide open. But spend time with that, just as important as everything else. Kids today are under pressure like we've never seen before. Every young person right here shaking his head. It's incredible. I didn't have to deal with that kind of stuff. It was just like you're going to college. Okay, cool. But now it's the right college, the right internship, the right job, or else forget it, you're done. You might as well just pack it up. This is what kids are dealing with today. We haven't seen all of the unintended consequences of what that pressure has done yet, but we will. But when the parents do all the heavy lifting, we take away the pride and the self-esteem of the child because we're not looking at all these other parts that make them uniquely them. As a parent, you want to be the parachute. We all want the best for our kids, but allow them to get there. You're there to say, okay, I see a problem coming. Let's sit down and have a conversation. But give them the tools and the strength that they can do it on their own. The best things that when you look back at your life, it's not the events, it's how you felt at those events. That's what registers with us as people. So allow them to feel. Life doesn't stop happening just because we don't want to feel it. It's going to keep going. When I coach people through, I do the neurotransmitter work, the physiological work, and then I coach people beyond that. And it's all the same bottom line for everybody. But it's just packaged a little bit differently. We all have to feel, we all have to get through, we all have to get to the other side. The soul is what connects each and every one of us to our own unique selves. It's the beauty in all of us. Again, that's why it leaves with us, because there's only one us. We interact, we feel, we experience, and we imagine much more than our 5 senses with our soul. When our soul speaks to us, what is that? How do you define that? It's the ability to relate, to compare, to contrast to that which we see and feel. It's unexplainable, yet we all know we have these feelings. Soulful people, when you think about them, they're magnetic. They feel fulfillment in others. They feel joy in other people. They're happy. They have an energy field, they have a presence. It's not any exact definition, it's within the realms of poetry, with mystery, with suggestion. Yet this is in each and every one of us. The soul says, I am me with features of all my own. It makes you intimately you, even more than your emotions. Your soul makes you you. You can mask your emotions. You cannot mask your soul. It's you. It's the underlying force of all the motion that we create, and motion is life. The soul prefers hints rather than declarations. It's truly the master of all the possibilities. When you say, I just have this thing that won't go away. It's just burning in my soul. What does that mean? It's these hints that you're given. From where? We're all hardwired. By what? The divine. Even when orchestrating changes in paradoxically, we have a haven for safety. How does that happen? All these changes are going in your life, and still there's a safety there. That's how God operates. I'm going to put you out there. I'm going to be there for you. And what do you think it would do to the kids, to the parents that feel all of this pressure on themselves in this world that we live in today if you say, you know what, I've got somebody working with me, the top guy? Might make you think a little bit differently. The ability to appreciate is the first step in realizing the profound value. As I said earlier, we spend our entire life trying to gather possessions, yet none of those come with us. The only thing that does is our soul. The soul is the prism through which we look deeply into something and discover its purpose. Another personal story I had was, has anybody ever read the book, The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho? Great book, great book. If you haven't, definitely suggest it. And then in there, he talks about this trek called the Santiago de Compostela de Santiago, the Camino. So I'm reading this book in probably 2 a.m. when I should have been asleep. And I just get this burning desire that I have to walk the Camino. And I'm doing a radio show, and I say this would be the perfect venue for me to broadcast my radio show. It's everything I talk about. Physical, it's going to be 543 miles. It's emotional. I'm going to do this by myself. It's intellectual. The people that have done this trail with 1,200 years of rich history, and it's spiritual. I have to do this. Just this burning desire. I'm like, Evelyn, it's a crazy idea. Have to do it. Evelyn, it's a crazy idea. Have to do it. Take 6 weeks off of work to do this. Doesn't make sense. It was my daughter's first year in college, so it was really the first time that I would have the opportunity to say, I'm going to do this. Take 6 weeks off. I'm like, I'm not European. I'm American. We don't take 6 weeks off, but I'm going to do it anyway. It makes no sense, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to broadcast my radio show. So I go and never got to broadcast my radio show. Technology didn't work. I actually wound up writing a book as a result of it. But it was the most incredible experience that I ever had in my life. And the first 12 days were, I would say, the hardest work I ever did in my life. I thought that it was going to be the physical part that was going to be the most difficult. It was the emotional part. It was all you do each and every day is eat, walk, and sleep. That gives you a lot of time to think. Time that you don't have in your regular day. Because when things come along, you're like, don't have time for that, put it back here, put it back here. Well, all you're doing is all day, all these things start coming back, and you come to terms with a lot that you figured never want to revisit this again. And the 3 meetings that Mr. Reedy described in the book were the meeting with yourself as the first meeting, because you really get to know yourself when you are with yourself all day and all you do is eat, walk, and sleep. You get to learn who you really are. On the 12th day, I went into a church, and there was a priest saying a mass, and just like everywhere else, diminished numbers. And I sat in the back row, kind of just taking this in. I'm not sure about all this. And he said, are there any English speakers here? I raised my hand. And he said, you're going to have 3 meetings along the way. The first meeting is going to be with yourself. The second meeting is going to be with the others that you meet here. And the third meeting is going to be with God. This was the part that got me. He said, and right now you know exactly who you are. Are you sure you want to go on? And I was like, my life's pretty good. I'm halfway in, halfway out. Do I want to keep doing this? And I went back, and every night I would write in my journal, and buddies that I had met along the way, they're all sitting outside having some wine, and they're like, Evelyn, how did it go? I'm like, I can't talk, and my daughter makes fun of me because when I get emotional, I'm about to cry, the first sign is my lip starts quivering. So I'm like, doing one of these, and I said, I just need to go inside and be by myself. So I just wrote down the 3 meetings. Well, the rest of the Camino was, I met incredible people. I met people that weren't your typical Disney World goers, we'll put it that way. These were people that were on a search for whatever, maybe just the physical quest of it. I met people who had lost a spouse, who had lost friends, who lost their jobs, who were there trying to get away from it all. Incredible people I met. And then that was the second meeting. So in the book, I talked about the second meeting life, which is the people that we meet along the way in our life. And there are people that raise us up, and we also meet people that tear us down. But they all serve a purpose to get us to become who we are. And then the third meeting was with God. Why are we here? What's our purpose? And that, I went to broadcast a radio show, and that never happened. But what happened was me saying, this information is so important. People spend their lives working on things that in the end really don't matter. And I want to share more of getting people just to kind of open up their minds and say, let me start spending some time on these other things. And I want to end tonight the way I end every radio show. I say your heart is the greatest healer of your life, and your soul, that's the heart of your life. Let's start living, folks. Today starts. And I say today, here I say, today starts tonight. Thank you very much. Any questions anyone would like to ask? Shoot.
So you mentioned adrenal deficiency. What's the first thing you then prescribe to somebody who would have that, or how would you?
Well, the first thing I would do is the objective tests, which sometimes I use blood, sometimes I use urine, sometimes I use saliva. It just depends on the patient when we do an interaction and find out the intake information. But using the, for example, the saliva and the urine, that tells me what your body is able to break down versus your blood, which just tells me what's clinically within your body, within your blood. The metabolites of the breakdown tell me something different. So I would measure your cortisol levels, which are your stress hormones, and we measure those 4 times a day because we have something called the circadian rhythm, and you guys probably know exactly what I'm talking about because everybody here is a smart kid and that has smart parents to have smart kids. And you should have different levels all day. And you should wake up with a high level. As the day goes on, it should come down. As the afternoon comes along, it should go up again. And as the night comes, the normal would come down. And what we're seeing in people is they're waking up and their body really has never gone to sleep and never recharged because they're waking up at about 50% of where they should be. So you're starting out your day already behind the 8 ball, so to speak. And what we're seeing a lot of is at night, people aren't coming down, they're going up because we're living this frenetic pace. That answer your question?
Yeah, I guess also treatment, like what would be treatment?
Well, that would depend on what we find. Right. Questions? Any?
Is there, who could we go to in our area who does what you do?
I actually do see patients all over the world, virtually, yeah. So I don't know anybody here in this area, but I mean, I do that as well. Yeah, that's how I treat my patients. That's what I do is first thing. This is my contact information. This is my cell phone number here. I would ask that if you just text me first, before we'd have any, if we need to talk on the phone, then we would, but just text me with the question that you have and would love to go further.
I'm confused. Are you a physician?
I am by training, a chiropractor. Then I went post-grad to medical school, and I do not have a medical degree. I did post-grad training.
Right.
Yep.
And is your treatment more similar to functional medicine docs?
Yes.
Supplements?
Yes. Yeah. And again, if it's a situation, I'm going to throw out a number here, but greater than 90% with neuromodulation, with supplementation, we can get it handled, but I'm not the person that's going to say no to anything else if that's what's needed.
I just had a question with kind of more nutrition. My mom's like super into vitamins,
Mhm.
and I just want to know your take on that. Just because I know as a culture, a lot of our produce is obviously like the actual like nourishment is being diminished in the
Mhm.
food we're producing. So like one apple now was like, you know, half the nutrition.
Right.
One
Right,
4
because of
years ago.
soil, right.
So how much is are vitamins like necessary, and do they actually benefit the human body?
Could you repeat the question for the?
Okay, so basically it's, do we need vitamins? And because of the lifestyle and the soil at which our produce is being grown in, do I agree that we need vitamins? And ideally, we shouldn't have to have vitamins or supplementation, but just as you said, we're bombarded with so many other things today. Should everybody be taking the same vitamins? Probably not, other than a multi. But that's the good and the bad. You know, the good and the bad is people can also do too much. If you don't know what your biochemistry is, you could be giving it something that it doesn't need and creating a problem, as well as having an insufficiency and not taking care of that and creating a problem. So it can get a little bit dangerous if people just start throwing vitamins and supplements on, and it's not necessary, aside from the big things, you know, vitamin C, I have a cold, okay, let's do that. But good question, and it is part of what's happening today. Our soil is so diminished from the nutrients that even organic foods aren't always what they should be.
You mentioned earlier about a lot of kids are having like ADD and ADHD. Could you comment a little bit about why maybe we're seeing it? Are we seeing it more than we used to back in the day? Like
Oh yeah.
Ritalin and stuff?
In my school, they would be like, so-and-so needs a kick in, you know.
Because when I was a kid, I was diagnosed with that, and my dad would have me take Ritalin, and then my mom was against it. And
Right.
so sometimes I would take it, and then I wouldn't.
Right.
When I wouldn't take it, they'd say, "Oh, you're doing better." Like, why?
I'm not shocked. I'm not shocked. And,
Can you comment a little bit on that?
well, yeah, first off, start off with what I talked about with kids being put on ADD, ADHD medication, and we really don't know what their biochemistry is. So that's the first problem. That you could potentially be giving a kid a drug that they don't need, and we haven't had these drugs around long enough to know what the long-term effects of them are. So we haven't really seen what we're going to get into yet. Were kids diagnosed 40 years ago? No. Why? Same theory as the adrenal medications. They weren't available. And then when they became available, every kid had a label. You know, not like, okay, maybe I need a little bit more time in math than you do. It doesn't make me ADD. You know, but now it's kind of, we're using this big everybody is thing. But the biggest problem is that we're not doing, although the tests exist, we're not doing the tests. And what if, say in your situation, it was an epinephrine was out of balance, but maybe also there was serotonin out of balance, and you're just taking Ritalin? That's not going to be the answer to it. And then we started out with only one drug, now we have about 6 or 7. And we go from one to the other. Let's try that. We shouldn't try. We should do. Because we have, I'm not the scientist, I'm not the genius, I'm not the person that came up with this. I'm just the person that says, hey, what are we doing this for? Spending government dollars on research, but then we just say, good job, I did a good job today. And we do nothing with that information.
Dr. Higgins, you've mentioned neurotransmitters before, and can you explain a little bit about what that means? Does that refer to cortisol and dopamine?
Cortisol is a hormone, dopamine is a neurotransmitter or a brain chemical.
Could you distinguish those a little bit and maybe talk about what some of the most common ones are? I mean, I think everybody's heard of dopamine, but
Okay.
what was the other one? Cortisol and
Serotonin, most people have heard of.
Yeah. What they do for the body and
Right. SSRI drugs are for serotonin. Let me start with, for example, dopamine. Dopamine is risk and reward, pleasure and pain. So if someone has an addiction, typically they're going to have an imbalance in dopamine. This can be changed, yet we don't address that. We just, tell them, you gotta stop. It's messing up your life. Well, the person could probably say, duh. But we're not looking at what that is. For example, today I was reading about the rise in heroin use, and The crazy part is that it's middle-class people, mostly women, and these numbers have gone through the roof. And the reason that it's middle-class, mostly women, is because the spike in heroin use is by people that were using opioids or pain medications that no longer work after typically 3 months. 75% of the people that were now addicted to heroin were opioid users who were regular people. What do? I have pain. You go to the doctor. What does the doctor do? Gives you a prescription. It's this vicious cycle that we're in. Nobody starts out their day saying, I want to ruin myself, my family, and everybody else that I know. No one starts out there. It's a slippery slope that we wind up at. And if we had looked at someone's neurotransmitter levels, their brain chemical levels, you'd say, here's where your dopamine is. We need to get it to here. Well, let's give your body what it needs to get the dopamine to where it should be.
What can you use as resources for something like dopamine? Is it like nutritional supplements? Is it,
How do I treat something like dopamine? Yeah, it's what we call neuromodulation. It's basically there's a chemical pathway for dopamine, and there's different cofactors that allow the dopamine to work in your body. And we look at where that's at and give your body the cofactors that it needs for the dopamine to work correctly. Does that make sense?
so is it a chemical treatment, a nutrition treatment, is it electro? What do you do?
First line of defense is going to be natural. Second would be chemical. Bless you.
How do you test neurotransmitter levels?
The same one I talked about with the adrenals.
Is it blood?
Blood or urine or saliva. Mhm.
And it's curious that doctors, right, traditional doctors, aren't looking at some of these things. We know that this is what's behind a lot of our poor health.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about why you think, and I know you're not throwing doctors under the bus because you recommend medicine when it's necessary, but can you talk about why this isn't part of the medical training to look at hormones and neurotransmitters?
Because they don't know about it yet. It's not, it is new, and my situation was kind of I wound up being in this position and said, I left the emergency room with, this is going to happen to you, and that's the best I can tell you. I'm like, we've got to do better than that, and did my own research, and did research and deep research, and I'm like, this stuff is out there. But it's not disseminated to the public. It hasn't been around long enough that people are learning about it in school. And let's face it, doctors they're lucky if they get home at 9, 10 o'clock at night. They don't have the time to say, let me go research on myself. Where they really learn from is the pharmaceutical reps that come in and say, here's the best drug for your diabetic patient, here's the best drug for your patient with high cholesterol, and that's how they learn. And it's just the reality of how it works.
Could you tell some success stories of treatments that you've had with patients?
Well, the first one was myself. And when I do a talk and I show the lab results, I say to people, and the patient gave me permission to show this lab result because the patient's me, and people usually go, wow, because my cortisol levels were flatlined. Literally, it was a situation of, if I wanted to, I could have said, I can't get out of bed. And I did the treatment myself and was amazed. And so often with people, like I've had patients that literally start crying when I talk to them and say, I had people telling me this was all in my head, this was impossible, and then they're on the other side of it and their lives literally are changed. Usually you have no idea of how bad you feel until you feel differently. Like when I started my own treatment, I was telling everybody I know, you're not going to believe how good I feel, because I really probably hadn't felt like that since I was a kid. I'm gonna gather, because it's not one day. Like I said in the beginning of the talk, I said you're not healthy one day and sick the next. It's all the living that you do in between that brings you to either end of that. So it's that every day that it just gets to the point where finally your body says, we're done. We're gonna shut it down today because you're gonna keep on going and it's not gonna have a pretty ending. And thank God that happened. Anyone else?
How bad is GMO food?
How bad is GMO food? That's a great debate. Actually, I debated it with a lobbyist for GMOs. And I gave it's not personal, but it's bad. And I look at a lot of things of what we're seeing today as normals. It's because of what we're putting in our bodies. The easiest way, there wasn't enough time tonight to say, it was just to kind of say, here's the bigger picture of your health. And then here's the action steps of your health, how you can change all these things. We don't have time to do all that tonight, but the easiest way to change your health is really your diet. And GMOs, we are going to see what happens with GMOs down the road. We think we're going to save money. It's going to cost us so much more in health costs. It doesn't make sense. But again, it's how things work. It's how things work. A company says our profit bottom line can be greater, then we're going to send some lobbyists to Washington and we're going to get them to do this and we're going to have it work, and some people benefit. It's just the way things work, but not good is the quick version of the answer to that question.
Could you explain GMOs for the ignorant,
Genetically-
nutritionally ignorant among us?
Genetically modified foods. So for example, with corn, we're using a different source of corn to grow corn, which is genetically modified. You're now changing the structure of someone's DNA by eating these things. There's something called epigenetics, which is really late breaking in the science world, and it's really cool stuff, because what we're learning is that we all have the ability to upregulate or downregulate our DNA. In other words, make our DNA better or make it worse by what we do. 70 to 85% of the diseases that we're plagued with are lifestyle based. That's by far the great majority, and we spend all this time talking about the 15%. But what we can do, we really don't work on. And yeah, we're just seeing with epigenetics a way of, let me back up, 10 to 33% of your health is based on your genes. Most people like to blame everything on their genes. And well, my mom or my dad had this, my grandmother or my grandfather had this, so it's just going to happen to me. I might as well go along and just realize it. No, the real reason is because most of us have the same habits as our mom and dad or our grandparents or whomever, and that's why it happens. So we now know with hard data that we can change our DNA. That's incredible. That's really incredible. And we're not doing it.
When you say with the like heredity diseases
Mhm.
and things like that, I've done a lot of research on ADD because I didn't think it was for real.
Right.
And but the more I read about it and everything, the more it's like, okay, well, it fits me, it fits both of my kids,
Mhm.
and I won't do I don't like the medication and all of that. But so, what is it? It is
Right.
something like that.
Okay.
I mean, is it really like changeable? Could we stop it? So
Yes.
Their kids.
Yes,
You
yes.
know what I mean? That
So you have a
we can
predisposition
reduce the-
yourself
Yeah.
in one of the chemicals or several,
Yeah.
and your children have that same thing. Could that have been inherited? Maybe. Could it be?
I think.
Yeah.
I look at my family and I see it.
You can see it,
in other members
and
of
that
my
usually
family.
happens
Yeah.
with a lot of people. So
But is it lifestyle?
that usually comes into play,
Yeah.
but you would have the neurotransmitters measured, and then we'd say, okay, here's where this is at, where's this is at, we need to get to here, and this is how we're going to do it. And then you go back and you look at it again, are we here? And you really change someone's health destiny. And for the most part, with things like ADD, ADHD, there are a lot of career paths that it works for. Sales, places where you're just talking all the time. Radio show host, talking all the time. But you can really change someone's health. You can keep the good parts. And most of people with ADD, ADHD are really bright people. And the thing is that it just never shuts up. It just keeps going, going, going up here. So you can take all that's good and say, I want to bring it down a little bit. And you can do that. And that's the epigenetics part. That's neuromodulation. That's what's taking what is your DNA and modifying it. And we can do this today. Yet we sit looking at something like in 2020, the second leading cause of medical disability is going to be depression. When we have this stuff available, that's what makes me nuts.
To what do you attribute the increase in the diagnosis of autism, especially in young kids?
Right.
Where, it's not like the function of lifestyle, or what are your thoughts on that?
That's a really tough subject, and the fact that we see it more in boys. I think on the spectrum disorders, we just have a lot more diagnoses available than we did before, but I think there is definitely a prevalence. And to answer that, I think it's a factor of a lot of things. I think it comes into diet, environment, genetics. I think it's all of it. And it's kind of like the cancers. You can't just say one definitive answer. You have to really look at each individual and say, how would we change this? But when we see growing numbers like that and we just say, well, we're just going to keep on going on, I don't know. I don't know. What I do know is that someone with autism could be optimized. Would they be 100% compared to someone else? They're going to be there 100%. They may not compare to another person that doesn't have that problem, but it can be optimized. I do know that.
I think a lot of people are starting to get to the point in our culture, maybe it's not a majority, but a lot of people are, as Ben said, are realizing that they don't want to have drugs in their bodies, right? They want to try to
More than
eat
ever.
right and have seek out natural remedies to your ailments. Can you give some practical, like how do you judge? All right, you've got a sinus infection, or you think it's a sinus infection, and you don't want to go on antibiotics because, look at my case, for 10 years as a teacher, every year between Thanksgiving and Christmas, I got a sinus infection. I had to go on antibiotics every year. I just couldn't beat it. It
Right.
knocked me out. Until finally, I started changing my lifestyle a little bit, and I haven't had to do it in a while. But how do you make the judgment call between fighting something nutritionally and saying, all right, I got to go see a doctor and get some medicine for this?
First thing is you're really your best doctor because you know your body better than anybody does. And you usually, again, instinct, you usually say, all right, this is one that I'm going to need to go get antibiotics for. But using the antibiotics example, so many of the antibiotics don't work for people anymore because they've been so abused. So again, first line of defense would be go natural route, but if this is historically for you every single Christmas, you say, I need to build up my immunities, knowing that this is going to happen, starting, and what happens during that time of year too? From Halloween through New Year's, we eat like crap. I mean, right? Is that the truth?
I didn't, but
And-
I think most people do.
And we're burning the candle at both ends because it's a season when parties start and you're going to meet family and you're going to meet friends, and it just goes for this couple-month period that doesn't end. So we are worn out and our body's immune system is depressed. So that's another reason why, why people get the flu more often, starting Thanksgiving through February, say, because our bodies have gone through so much without really optimal living during that time as well. So you would know your body and say, okay, it's time to charge it up. I've got to beef up this, that, make sure sleep is so underrated. When I use that example of why it's used in warfare, that's the truth. It's so underrated. We consider it like an extra. And it's your body's chance to recharge, to detoxify, and we're not doing it. So that's, and knowing yourself really, is the biggest thing.
Just kind of shifting gears a little bit, but just in regards to just the increase, especially young adults and teenagers, just in non-belief in God and just a growing atheism. Do you have any cool statistics or like numbers just on the reality of like our bodies physically react to prayer and to meditation
Right.
and to belief.
Right.
So do you have any just kind of stuff that factors in like this is actually good for our bodies, and good for like our souls when they're both cooperating together?
Absolutely, and again, if you go to the the gold standard, the Harvards and everybody else, they're telling people this information of, we know that prayer works, we know that meditation works, we know all of these things that slow your body and your mind down work. We want you to use the words that you're comfortable with, but all of these things actually work, and they change your physiology. There's a lot of studies out there that discuss the change in physiology in someone's body before and after prayer. There's functional MRIs that have been done of people of monks, the monk study, of their brain functioning as a result of meditation, and how that really changes your brain in such a positive way. And again, that's information that is cool stuff and should be shared by people, and using whatever words they're comfortable with. I had this discussion with my daughter where she said, like, Mom, when she was in high school, there's the growing number of atheists, and she said, what do you say to that? I said, I'm not a theologian. I said, but when somebody wants to fight you tooth and nail for something that doesn't exist, what's within them? I believe that we're hardwired with that as well. This soul of ours is hardwired from something. And if you want to fight to the death over something that if it really doesn't exist, if it doesn't exist, man, I gotta go. But no, want to fight to the end, the battle. Why? You're fighting yourself. It doesn't make sense. But the research is there for talking about how prayer, how meditation, having volunteerism helps people live longer. Sharing in community helps people live longer. The research says that actually when you do something good for someone else, you actually get more physiological benefit than the receiver gets. We have that research. Cool stuff. And again, why do we do the research if we don't disseminate the information? Are we afraid to share that? Because we have the courage to say, well, we believe that all this stuff really does change it. Here's the research, and it's because of this. Anyone? You like Ferris Bueller's teacher? Anyone? Anyone? All right.
Thank you, Dr. Higgins.